Good afternoon, everyone. I am Amani Jamal. I'm the Dean of the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. It's such a pleasure to welcome you to today's Dean's Leadership Series event with General Mark Milley. We are very honored to welcome General Milley to his first public talk at Princeton SPIA since he's been serving as the Charles and Marie Robertson Visiting Professor and Visiting Lecturer. And also General Milley this summer earned an honorary doctoral degree, so we should call him Dr. General Mark Milley. General Milley is the retired chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and a perfect choice for this timely discussion on U.S. foreign policy options in Afghanistan and other regions of the world post-2021. When we launched the Afghanistan Policy Lab, I linked the initiative to the school's responsiveness to needs within the global community and our commitment to providing humanitarian support, assistance, and advice. Today's discussion embodies that vision. My thanks to General Milley, to the director of the Afghanistan Policy Lab, Ambassador Adila Raz, and her team for arranging today's discussion, and to SPIA's own Razia Iqbal for moderating. With that, I'll turn it over to Ambassador Raz.
Thank you, Dean Amani, and good afternoon. I also wish to extend my warm welcome to everybody today here on behalf of the Afghanistan Policy Lab at Princeton School of Public and International Affairs on today's Fireside discussion on navigating foreign policy options for Afghanistan and beyond. As the US approaches its upcoming election, the new administration will be facing a range of challenges abroad, such as the situation in the Middle East, Ukraine, and Afghanistan. With the US deep history in the region, Afghanistan remains a very complex issue for policymakers, especially after Taliban's return to power in 2021. The country faces a severe humanitarian crisis, the collapse of human rights and women's rights, and increasing security threats. These challenges underscore the urgency finding a viable path forward. The international community remains concerned about the spillover of violence, refugee flows, and the resurgence of terrorism. The particular concern is the Taliban's alignment with extremist groups, raising fears of broader regional instability. Today's discussion, organized by the Afghanistan Policy Lab, will explore foreign policy options, assess their feasibility, and consider the broader implication for the US engagement in Afghanistan and, of course, the broader region, including the Middle East, under the new administration. Now, it is my honor to invite Dean Amani Jamal, General Mark Milley, and Razia Iqbal to take the stage. While they are taking their seats, let me very briefly introduce General Mark Milley, who simply needs no introduction. And of course, then Razia Iqbal. General Mark Milley is the Charles and Mary Robertson Visiting Professor at Princeton SPIA and recently retired as the 20th Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, the nation's highest-ranking military officer in the US, and the Principal Military Advisor to the President, Secretary of Defense, and National Security Council. He previously served as the Chief of Staff of the US Army and has held numerous command positions over his 44 years of career, including deployment to Afghanistan, Iraq, and other key operations globally. General Milley holds degrees from Princeton and Columbia and the US Naval War College, and he is a distinguished leader in national security and strategic affairs. Thank you, General, for taking the invite and being with us today. Razia Iqbal. She is a visiting lecturer at the Humanities Council, Fiera's Professor of Journalism, and an anchor of News Hour on the BBC World Service, the current affairs program with 12.5 million listeners in the US and millions around the world. For the last 3 decades, she has reported from around the world, including as a special correspondent for BBC TV. Iqbal has presented in-depth interview series, Witness History, Talking Books, and Dream Builders, as well as documentaries for both the radio and TV. Thank you, Razia, for taking today's invite, for moderating the conversation with Dean Amani Jamal, And Dean Amani, Jamal, and Razia, handing it over to you.
Yes.
That's never good.
Checking that my mic is on and working. It's a real privilege to be involved in the moderation of this conversation, General Milley. We've got an awful lot to get through, so I'm gonna jump right in.
Why do I feel like this could get sporty as I look here? And reminds me of the
just-
movie Gladiator or something.
It's going to be great. In March this year, you testified before the House Foreign Affairs Committee about the US's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. Everyone who's in this room will have seen those pictures. And you said, among other things, at the end of 20 years, we, the military, helped build an army, a state, but we couldn't forge a nation. You called it a strategic failure. I wonder, as you reflect on that now, whether you are willing to acknowledge that it was also a moral failure.
I don't know about the moral part of it or not, to be honest with you. I think that there was a fair amount of good done in Afghanistan over 20 years. But at the end of the day, the Taliban occupied the capital city. They took the country over, and the regime that we supported in our efforts in Afghanistan failed. And why was that? There's a lot of reasons. There's many, many lessons that are going to come out of our experiences in Afghanistan. And it's going to take years for professional historians to mine those lessons. So it's going to take quite a while for that all to flesh out. But moral failure, I'm not willing to go there on that, because I think going into Afghanistan was morally justifiable, given the attack of 9/11 and the murder of 3,000 American and international citizens in New York and in the Pentagon. So morally, I think it was the correct thing to do at the time in order to rectify and destroy the Al-Qaeda threat.
Can I ask you specifically about that? Because much, much later after that, so I'm quoting Lakhdar Brahimi, the envoy who was involved in the peace process over many, many years inside Afghanistan. And he describes the original sin in the entire 20-year history of US involvement in Afghanistan as being the US's failure to not engage with the Taliban from the outset. That when the Taliban said to George W. Bush, you know what, we will negotiate the handing over of Osama bin Laden, President Bush said, absolutely not. There's no negotiation. Unless you hand them over, you will be part of what we see as the threat to the rest of the world. I wonder whether militarily, when you look back on that 20-year, in many people's eyes, failure. A lot of people see it as catastrophic, not just the chaotic ending, but the engagement and what it leaves Afghanistan facing today. I wonder whether that original sin, as outlined by Lakhdar Brahimi, was something that, as a military man, you now look on that and think, well, maybe something could have been done differently in those early days.
I think it's possible. I don't want to stand here in 2024 and make judgment on the, for me to make judgment, right? I'll leave that up to historians once all of the records are mined and once all the evaluation and the emotion of Afghanistan and this professional analysis done by professional historians. I was Colonel Milley when the planes hit, and I was Chief of Staff of the 25th Division in Hawaii when the planes hit. I had not barely even heard of Al-Qaeda when that happened, and I was woke up by the watch officer out in Hawaii. It was like 2 or 3 in the morning, as I recall, screaming, saying the United States is under attack. Turn on your TV. And at that point, both planes had already hit the towers, and the third plane was hitting the Pentagon. And I alerted the division commander, and for the first time in U.S. history, we enacted the Defense of the Hawaiian Island Plan since World War II. So we had troops on Waikiki Beach. Nobody knew what was happening at that moment in time.
And what could have happened immediately after.
Very few people knew, and that's 9/11. And then I think it's, I can't remember the date, maybe it's the 11th or the 9th or something like that of October, where we then begin to enter into Afghanistan with a small group of special forces and CIA with the Northern Alliance to essentially overturn the Taliban. What you're talking about are the negotiations that were occurring between 9/11 and the entry of those troops a month later, right?
Yeah,
In that
exactly.
30 days. I'm not going to second guess presidential decision-making during that period of time, first of all. Secondly is, and people can disagree with it all they want, I fully support what President Bush said. The Taliban were hiding an organization. They were aiding and abetting an organization that just murdered 3,000 Americans and international people in the United States of America. There ain't no negotiation. Sorry about it. You give up bin Laden or you face what the United States did, which overturned the Taliban. I think we did make a bunch of mistakes, by the way. That's not to say we didn't make mistakes. I think the very first mistake we made was we didn't kill bin Laden up in the Tora Bora Mountains when we could have in the winter of 01, 02. We had him basically within our sights, more or less. We had pretty good intelligence on his location, and we had the capability to do it. He was physically inside Pakistan, and decisions were made not to cross an international border of a sovereign country with U.S. military forces. They had a strike operation. Had we eliminated and killed bin Laden at that point, I think the entire history would have changed. But you can never go back with counterfactuals. You can't go back and say, if this, then that, because that moment in time that seemed to the decision makers that made that decision not to kill bin Laden were correct. I think another strategic mistake, for example, was the Bonn Agreement. The Bonn Agreement was okay, but the Bonn Agreement, one of the things the Bonn Agreement did was they divided up the development of the national security forces, the Afghan security forces. So they gave the development of the Afghan army to the United States. And then within the development of the army, the development of the officer corps was given to the French, and the development of the non-commissioned officer corps was given to the British, and so on. So the army was the responsibility of the Americans, the British, and the French. The police were given the responsibility, to the Germans. And the design of the police was designed to be essentially like the British Bobby or the German Polizei, to be traffic police, crime police, investigate crimes, etc. The Tashkil, the design of the Afghan security forces, the paper design, was 350,000, with roughly speaking half police and half army, and there was no design initially for the border police. The police were designed, as I said, like the British Bobbies or the Polizei, which is exactly what Afghanistan did not need. What Afghanistan did need was a national police force that was oriented toward counterinsurgency operations, like the Colombian National Police or the say the Italian Carabinieri or something like that. What they didn't need were traffic cops. And so what that then meant was your primary counterinsurgency force ends up being the Afghan army, which is half of the 350. And those numbers, if you do the math and you study counterinsurgency doctrine, those numbers are nowhere near adequate to develop a coherent counterinsurgency strategy, the likes of which the Taliban could execute with safe haven in Pakistan. It wasn't even in their all. That was a major strategic error made early on, 2002, 2003. We didn't recover from that until the mid 2000s, looking at probably 2006, 2007. By that time, the insurgency movement had gained enormous steam. They were operating in the villages. They were setting up alternative forms of government and all of that. So that's another strategic mistake. And a third huge one, in my mind, Clausewitz tells you that the acme of skill for the statesman is to understand the war upon which you are about to embark, right? We did not understand, we, the United States, the Germans, the Brits, the French, nobody actually understood the very nature of the armed conflict which we were entering and the political nature of it. We didn't understand Afghanistan and its tribal nature. We didn't understand the internals, the villages, etc. And those are real big mistakes early on that don't manifest themselves in terms of the defeat mechanisms at the tail end for years. But these were early mistakes that had huge consequences later on.
Do you think part of the mistakes that you're outlining in that last answer are really to do with a reluctance to study the history of a country before you embark on an idea of helping an army, trying to build a nation state. I mean, Afghanistan has a history that would have indicated to the US Army that the people inside Afghanistan defeated the Soviet Union. They withdrew. The United States withdrew, having spent trillions of dollars at the loss of, hundreds of thousands of Afghans and also many American troops. So I wonder about the kinds of conversations that somebody like you might have with a politician as a military leader about the desire and the efficacy of studying the history of a country.
Well, we did, but we didn't do it in those 30 days, right? Between 9/11 and the entry of US military forces into Afghanistan. You're not going to study a country that has thousands of years of history going back to Alexander the Great. You're not going to do that in 30 days. Now, maybe you can do that at Princeton and get a PhD doing it, but you ain't going to do that for real. So you're not going to do that. It's not fair to say that there were not people in our government and in other governments that did not understand the history. There are, and there were, and there still are. But what I'm saying is that we didn't understand, like, the language, for example, or the multiple languages. I've been in valleys in Afghanistan where the only language that valley spoke was in that valley, and no one else on earth spoke that language, right? So this is a very complex society. It's not something easily learned, and we didn't have the necessary expertise to understand the nature of the war upon which we're about to embark. So that's the first point. The second thing is, because it's an insurgency and because it's a guerrilla war, the fundamental issue for all 20 years, even today, the fundamental issue is the legitimacy of the government, the regime, right? In the eyes of the people that they're supposedly serving. That was fundamentally a flaw where the Afghan government, writ large, not every village, not every person, but writ large, the Afghan government was not deemed as a legitimate political force inside the eyes of a good number of people inside Afghanistan. And the Taliban exploited that. And the Taliban exploited it at the village level in ways that we were not able to adequately see because of language and cultural differences and history and all of that. But it wasn't because people didn't read history books. People did. I've read tons of Afghan history books as fast as I could, and many others did too. But it's much deeper than that. It's much beyond that.
I'm very mindful of the fact that you have served in the military your whole career, and this is kind of a political question, I guess, because in the run-up to the engagement in Afghanistan, there were many people who made speeches, many political leaders, but also people like Laura Bush made speeches about how the women of Afghanistan were absolutely central to the mission that the US was aiming towards in the country. What would you say today to a 21-year-old woman in Afghanistan who is banned from basically doing virtually anything, but whose entire identity is based on 20 years of the American narrative inside Afghanistan?
There's not much I could say to her. It's a tragedy beyond description. So under the Soviet rule, Afghan women actually were liberated in many, many ways, to tell you the truth. And then when the Soviets were defeated and kicked out, Afghanistan reverted to a civil war, brutal civil war. And many Afghan women, especially outside the city of Kabul, were back to tribal traditions, etc. When the United States went in, there was a reversal, more or less a liberalization, I guess, of Afghan women. When I first entered Afghanistan, shortly after 9/11, and I was a brigade commander at the time, and I was one of the guys who helped start the Afghan National Army on my first tour, right? Colonel Milley. And when I went there, the first time it took, I don't know, maybe 8 to 12 hours to drive from Kabul to Jalalabad. The holes were all potted. There was zero, as I recall, there was zero schools available to women when I first showed up in Afghanistan. Medical care was not available to really almost anybody outside of outside of the urban areas, significant medical care. University, I think there was one, as I recall, there was one sort of university, and it was available only to males when I first showed up. 15, 20 years later, there was significant progress made. Girls' schools were built. There was a lot of women in universities, a lot of students in universities. Medical care was available to most Afghans. It wasn't maybe the equivalent of medical care you might get, in Princeton, New Jersey, but it was decent medical care that was available out there. You had, water was available. That road that took 8 to 12 hours took significantly less to drive. Roads were built and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of material progress, but therein part of that lies the problem. Is we went from a military problem of destroy Al-Qaeda with the military purpose to prevent terrorists from striking the United States from the land mass of Afghanistan. That was the original mission. Mm-hmm. That then expands, though, into this other mission that, and this is what I get at with that quote, we could build an army, but you couldn't build a nation, which is this nation building thing. Militaries are not good at that. We don't do that. That's not the core fundamental task and responsibility of militaries. Now, it has been done where militaries help do that. Militaries support doing that, but it's not the primary mission. That is the mission of others, and specifically the indigenous government or the host nation government. And you can't force that. That has to be done. We can build schools and we can help with medical care. We can provide for all kinds of things. But really what the military needs to do is provide a security umbrella, a security shield from the guerrillas or the insurgents or the terrorists in order for indigenous economic and social and cultural and educational development to take place. But it can't be the military that does those things. That has to be other people to do those things. And primarily that's a function of the host nation government. And it was done, there were progress, but it wasn't done to the extent that it needed to be in order to establish the firm political legitimacy of the central government in the eyes of the Afghan people. And that's fundamentally a political issue that was never resolved satisfactorily.
So I'm going to ask you another political question, only because I know that you watch these things carefully and you're informed by your military experience. But given where Afghanistan is now, this acute humanitarian crisis, right, this acute moral crisis, if you like, where half of the population are being made invisible, right, what is the role of the United States in that context? What kinds of things should the US government, perhaps not this one, but the next administration now, given that we're so close to a presidential election, what do you think the role should be given how catastrophic the leaving of that country was and the relationship that the Taliban has with the rest of the world, which is an isolated one?
Well, I mean, first of all, we have to deal with the reality. So it would be nice if we could sprinkle magic dust to make the world a better place. It would be lovely, but it's not real, right? And what can the United States realistically do relative to the Taliban, relative to the country of Afghanistan? Yes, it is a humanitarian disaster. Yes, women are suffering tremendously. Yes, there's all kinds of human rights violations. Yes, an organization that I considered for most of my adult life to be a terrorist organization is in fact now the government of that country. I fought them for years on multiple tours in Afghanistan. There's no love lost between me and the Taliban sort of thing. So what can realistically we can do? And I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but the answer is not much. It's a country that we have very little actual, no kidding, influence over at this time. And it is not likely that we're going to have tremendous influence. There are some things that can be done. For example, you can work through third parties. You can work through other countries to reach into the Taliban, to moderate their behavior. You can work with financial institutions and NGOs and so on. But direct relations between the United States and the Taliban, which, by the way, the State Department does have some things going on, but direct relations where we can have significant outsized influence to actually change outcomes, it's not much. It's literally not much. Is it sad? It is tragic? Yes, it's all of that.
And just on the point of the State Department having some avenues in which they are exploring, I mean,
Right.
is there an acknowledgement that there is a kind of battle inside the Taliban between those people who want to do a little bit more and those who are much more hardline? I mean, that is kind of what anyone from the outside is up against as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we've got intelligence organizations and we've got sophisticated officials in the State Department and elsewhere, USID and elsewhere, who do understand the internal, to a degree anyway, of what's going on inside the Taliban. But again, I don't want to overstate the case. There's not a lot of influence that the United States is going to have to determine outcomes for our greatest period of influence is gone. It was when we were there with significant military capability, a lot of USAID, a lot of money flowing into the country. We had enormous influence at that point, and we left. So we no longer have that level of influence. And so then one of the question becomes, what is our primary primary national security interest or national interest at this time? It is the same one from 2001, which is to prevent Afghanistan from having or sponsoring a terrorist organization that strikes the continental or strikes the United States, right? So Al-Qaeda, ISIS, or other organizations that may be in training camps or developing terrorist capabilities to strike the United States. That is the primary interest at this time of the United States relative to Afghanistan. And I want to say that we can solve the problem of women being abused or tragically being abused in Afghanistan. Or I want to solve the Uyghur problem, or I want to solve any number of issues around the world where people are suffering tragically, horribly. But you have to deal with the reality of the limits of your capability, the limits of your power. And the best we're going to do right now, at least from my perspective as a soldier, is we can try to use our capabilities to prevent the United States from being attacked by a terrorist organization from the landmass of Afghanistan. And we do that through a variety of means, both classified and unclassified.
Money.
So General Milley, if I can chime in on this before I turn into that, the more recent also escalation in the region. On this question, now that we know what happened and we have the benefit of hindsight, thinking about the counterfactual, had the U.S. stayed, was it inevitable that the Taliban were gaining the upper hand and would end up where they were? And if we had that knowledge, would the U.S. still would have withdrawn?
Well, first of all, you never can really know, right? So you can't prove it one way or the other. It was my belief, though, at the time, and obviously 80% of the American people and at least 2 consecutive presidents disagreed with this, so take it for what it's worth. But it was my opinion at the time that we, the United States, should have kept a small contingent of military forces in the number of 2,500. Maybe it would bounce up to 3,000. And these weren't average military guys. These were special forces type. And with them would have stayed 7 or 8 or more thousand NATO troops. And with them would have stayed 10 to 15,000 contractors, which are fundamental. Had that happened, had we made a decision to do that, then I believe that the Afghan National Security Forces and the government of Afghanistan would not have collapsed. It certainly wouldn't have collapsed when it collapsed, right? So that's proposition 1. But also what would have happened is we already went past the 1 May deadline, which was the deadline based on a Doha agreement made between the Trump administration and the Taliban, a bilateral agreement between the United States and the Taliban, a terrorist organization. So we made that agreement in February of 20, and it stated that all U.S. forces would be out by 1 May. Then President Biden comes in, extends that deadline after 6 weeks, 6 consecutive weeks of very deliberate, thoughtful debate inside the U.S. government with the Biden administration, taking into consideration all the various facts and recommendations, listening to the military, listening to the diplomats, listening to the CIA, listening to this, that, and everybody else, right? And President Biden made a decision to adhere to the withdrawal, which had already been signed up for in the Doha Agreement, only to change the date from May to the end of the summer, right? That was a decision of basically the same decision 2 consecutive presidents made. Dates were different. And that was also, if you look back at the polling inside the United States, if you look back at that, about 80% of the American public wanted to get out at that point in time, right? And political leaders do pay close attention to what the people have to say. The vast majority of Congress wanted out, the vast majority of the American people. I was of a different opinion. I don't think the Afghan government would have collapsed. But what would have happened, guaranteed would have happened, is the war with the Taliban would have reignited. So remember that from the Doha Agreement made in February 20 had a series of conditions.
Right.
And there were conditions for the Americans, there were conditions for the Taliban. And part of those conditions for the Taliban were that they would not openly attack and conduct lethal operations against U.S. or NATO military forces. All the other conditions were things like a reduction in violence, open up Taliban to the government of Afghanistan talks, etc. There's a whole series of other conditions. None of the other conditions were adhered to, zero, except the intentional lethal attacks on U.S. military forces. So for the last 9 months of the Trump administration, no U.S. military, and I think this is accurate, no U.S. military were killed in action in Afghanistan for the last 9 months of the Trump administration. And then from January 20th, 2021 until August 26th, no U.S. military were killed in action under the Biden administration. And then the bombing at Abbey Gate happened, where we lost 13 troops. We lost 11 Marines, 1 soldier, and 1 corpsman. But up until then, so for all those months, no American had been killed. That was the one condition that the Taliban did adhere to, and they knew that was the one condition that meant the most to the Americans, right? So those were the conditions, and we adhered to our conditions by pulling out. They did not adhere to any of their conditions except that one. But what would have happened had we stayed? Then that one condition would have changed very rapidly, and the Taliban would have begun yet again to conduct strike operations against the U.S. military. And we would yet again be involved in an extensive campaign. We, the military, myself, General McKenzie, the commander of CENTCOM, General Miller, who was the commander of forces in Afghanistan, we thought that was an acceptable level of risk for our forces. We had been there many times. We'd all done tours there. We'd all been in combat a lot. And these were highly trained special forces. And we thought that risk was acceptable, and that we would keep the Afghan security forces in the fight, keep the Afghan government afloat, and you wouldn't have had this collapse. That's the military view. Presidents have a much wider angle of view than just the military view. We have a narrow view when we advise presidents. They also have to take in economic factors, political factors, diplomatic factors, and many, many other factors. And look at 2 presidents fulfilled the will of the American people, made the decision to withdraw, and that's it. So that was how it happened. Those are my feelings at the time. Those are still my feelings, by the way.
Thank you, General Milley. Can we move on to the Middle East, Rosie? Are you?
Absolutely.
So that's the Middle East.
That's even better.
So
We knew it was going to improve, didn't
Can't we
we?
talk about like Princeton hockey or something? I mean, you don't want to do that?
So as you know, there's real fear that the conflict is going to expand to a regional conflict, a military regional campaign.
That's right.
And I know that you've spoken previously about the importance of having a parallel political process in play.
Right.
And so as you're looking at what's happening in the Middle East right now, are you worried about this escalation, number one?
Very much so, yeah.
And number two, what should a political process look like, and who should take, there's sort of like a vacuum of leadership right now, or perhaps at least what we're hearing is that the U.S. is not able to exercise leverage. Who's going to fill in this vacuum?
Well, the second question is very difficult to answer. I'll take a
I know
stab.
that you're
I'll take a stab at it.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm concerned, and I think most observers at least realize that there's a possibility, if not a probability, of a much wider conflict. It's already expanded, all right?
Yeah.
So with the attacks that not only into Gaza, but the attacks that have gone on in Lebanon. And by the way, there's been a low-level war with Lebanese Hezbollah for years, not just like in the last year, but many, many years. And since October 7th, I may have the numbers somewhat wrong, but I think there was several hundred Lebanese Hezbollah that were killed in frontier clashes on the northern frontier of Israel, southern frontier of Lebanon, and in rocket exchanges, and bombings, etc., raids going back and forth. I think there was about several hundred members of Lebanese Hezbollah that were killed, and I think there's several dozen IDF soldiers that were killed. And of course, Israel moved, I think it was 60, 70, 80,000 civilians out of the northern villages, et cetera, because of rocket attacks. So there's been a low simmering war going on the northern frontier of Israel for quite some time, picking up in intensity in this past year. And then Israel obviously made a decision to significantly disrupt Lebanese Hezbollah, starting with the pager attack to disrupt their leadership. But it wasn't just the pager attack. There's been attacks on Lebanese Hezbollah leadership for a bit of time. But the idea was, the Israeli idea, I think, and I'm saying this from open sources, not looking at all the classified material, but I believe that it was Israel's intent to disrupt the leadership of Lebanese Hezbollah in order to then get after the rocket capability and the missile capability to compel the withdrawal north of the Litani River of the Israeli or the threat to Israel from the Lebanese Hezbollah rockets, et cetera. And they started with the attack on leadership, and then they proceeded with this very intense air campaign that obviously part of that ended up killing Nasrallah and 20, as I understand it, 20 or 30 of his top leaders. And then they're also bombing and striking at missile batteries and missile caches, et cetera, in Lebanon. In response to that, you saw just the other night an Iranian action. You also saw a couple of missiles fired by the Houthis, and you saw some limited attacks by short-range rockets coming out of southern Lebanon. But you saw a significant attack come from Iran. 180, I think, is what the media is reporting. 180 or so ballistic missiles. Remember, a few months ago, Iran struck Israel with, I think it was 337 missiles, a combination of ballistic missiles, unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, and cruise missiles. So 3 different types of weapon systems. This time, as I understand it, it was all ballistic missiles. So the idea of expanding the war, I mean, look at it, it's happened. The war has expanded. So they're on what a lot of people call an escalation ladder. So the question is, how do you get off the escalation ladder before it turns into a very broad regional conflict that would be arguably catastrophic to the region, perhaps, and definitely disruptive to outside the region? How do you do that? How do you get off there? And what are the objectives here? And what's going on in terms of all these countries and their interests and all these different groups? Very hard to sort out. I've spent a good part of my adult life in the Middle East, and every time I think about it, the more I study it, the less I know sometimes. The Middle East is extraordinarily complicated. You know that as well as anybody. There are no easy solutions. There is only hard solutions that is going to require political leadership and capabilities, military intelligence and other capabilities. It's a very, very difficult problem to solve. Specific to Israel, and this is from an outsider looking in, and I'm not trying to be critical of Israel or supportive of Israel, but as an analytical observation, at least from my point of view, and again, I may be wrong because I can't see everything, but it doesn't appear to me that Israel has a political path. They have a military path. Clearly, they've been using a military instrument in Gaza. They're using the military instrument in Lebanon. But it's not obvious, it's not readily obvious to me that that's a parallel political path. The conduct of war is a political act. Warfare is an attempt to impose your political will on your opponent through the use of violence. But there's always a political track, political purpose, and a political end state that you're trying to achieve. And even in huge conventional wars like World War II, there were political parallel tracks amongst various nations. Even with the Germans, even with the Nazis. You remember one of the senior Nazi leaders flew to England to try to negotiate some sort of deal or whatever it was that he tried to do. So even in really big, arguably conventional wars that seem overwhelmingly military, there's a lot of politics that goes on. In this particular set of circumstances that are occurring in the Middle East right now, it is not evident to me that Israel has a political program to deal with the issue of Palestinians in Gaza or elsewhere for that matter, nor a political program to deal with Lebanese Hezbollah or Iran. Now, I'm not sure, maybe there isn't one. Maybe you can't have it. Maybe because of the charter of Hamas, which is dead set on the destruction of Israel. Maybe it's not possible. Okay, fine. But it doesn't appear to me that there is one on the Israeli side. On the flip side, I think there is some obligation, and this is just me now, my opinion, but I think there is an obligation of the international community to help out here, to try to bring some sort of rational resolution to some of these issues. Now, what could be done? I don't know. I'm not a diplomat. I'm not a magician, but there are some things I think that are reasonable. One is some sort of political arrangement where you use a military force, an Arab-based military force. Maybe it's Egypt, maybe it's Saudi, maybe it's Jordan, maybe it's some other combination to do what the United Nations calls peace enforcement operations. And maybe that's just fantasy on my part. Maybe it wouldn't work, but it's worth trying to organize. So a peace enforcement operation, not peacekeeping, because peacekeeping means there's a peace to be kept. So you have to go into Gaza with a Arab-led military force, remove the IDF, because it's just not going to work. The IDF and the Palestinians and Hamas and everybody else that's mixed into Gaza, it's not going to happen. You're just going to always have violence at that point. At some point, the IDF comes out once they've achieved their objectives, which for the most part, they've not completely destroyed Hamas, but they have destroyed a significant amount of Hamas. So maybe, possibly, with the right incentives, you could get an Arab-based force to go in there to stabilize the situation. And then that will take a period of time. How long that would take, I don't know, but it would be significant. So maybe they could go in and do stabilization operations. Think what happened with NATO forces in the Balkans. That's a peace enforcement, stabilization type force. And then that would go on for a period of time, a year, two, maybe who knows. And then there would have to be some sort of alternative political arrangement that had legitimacy in the eyes of the Palestinian people. It's not Hamas because Hamas is by definition a terrorist organization. So it's some alternative political entity, but not Hamas. It's probably my guess, and I'm not positive, but I don't think it's probably the Palestinian Authority. They may not have the legitimacy required. Maybe it's some other entity that has to be created somehow by the Palestinian people with the help of the international community that can perform some alternative, maybe it's a bridging solution, but something to settle down the violence, solve the humanitarian catastrophe, ensure that Israel remains secure, and ensure that the Palestinians have some sort of hope for an alternative vision of the future so that young angry men or women don't join terrorist organizations. Would it work? I don't know, but it's certainly better than dropping 2,000-pound bombs, right? So that might help out. Lebanese Hezbollah is a different situation, and Iran is different altogether.
I just want to jump in and ask one quick question. Given your assessment is that Israel has a kind of military, it's on a military mission, but it doesn't appear to have a political mission in place. And the context of all of this is that the United States gives Israel billions of dollars worth of military equipment to conduct that military mission. I wonder what your assessment is then of the lack of leverage inside Washington in this context.
Well, I mean, this shouldn't be rocket science at a place like this, right? So all countries operate off their national security interest, period. I mean, that's the very nature of international politics. So every country operates as they see their own, as they define their own interest. That is true of Israel. That is true of the United States. That's true of South Korea, Japan, Russia, China, you name it, right? And if Israel, so your leverage is limited as long as your leverage is limited to the extent that your interests are aligned. So if Israel's interests are fundamentally or different, perhaps, than an American interest, then your interest, you're not going to get that leverage. It's not going to happen. It doesn't matter how much money, weapons, or anything they have. And this is an age-old story. You can study relationships with all kinds of countries and other countries that get aid from them over the years. And if you look at various political science studies of the metropole, whether it's Great Britain, the United States, Soviet Union, China, Russia today, et cetera, as they sponsor smaller countries with weapons, munitions, aid, money, et cetera, their influence is limited only to the extent that their interests align at that moment in time. And if they diverge, then the smaller country or the larger country is going to follow the path of their national security interests. It's obvious to me, the United States, at least the public declaratory policies of the United States of the current administration, are not 100% aligned. The United States wants to ensure Israel has security. We're committed to that. We've been committed to it since 1948, and we're not going to walk away from that. I don't think any administration will do that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. So we're committed to that. Part of that commitment and part of the policies of the United States is to ensure that Israel has the means to defend itself. And we have certain qualitative agreements with Israel to make sure that they have the best equipment, et cetera, et cetera. So we're probably not going to walk away from that. But at the same time, the United States has, at least publicly, declaratory policy of the Biden administration has been to try to push for a ceasefire in Gaza in order to do maybe something along the lines that I mentioned. And obviously to date, that hasn't worked. Why is that? Because Israel has determined and stated that their national security objective, their core vital national security interest, and in their mind, they're fighting an existential fight. So their core vital national security interest is the destruction of Hamas as a political and military entity, to destroy it. Now, in military language, we use the word disrupt, deny, defeat, destroy, right? So destroy is different than defeat in our language. And the Israelis are using the military terminology, right? And when they mean destroy, they mean destroy. They mean to eliminate it as a coherent entity in its capabilities politically and or militarily. Now, as the Israeli military has said, at least some of them have said it publicly, Hamas is a physical entity. It's a military organization, a terrorist organization. It has leaders, it has structures, it has battalions, it has depots and logistics and weapons. It's also a political entity, but it's also an idea. It's more than just a physical entity. So the actual destruction of Hamas militarily is difficult, although they're doing it. They've destroyed probably 70 or 80% of Hamas in terms of the logistics and their fighters and so on. Destroying it politically, you got to take out the leadership. They're not quite there yet. But the idea of Hamas is very difficult. And the way you destroy an idea is you replace it with a better idea. And thus far, there's no better idea.